I wasn't born into wealth, luxury, or even comfort. My earliest memories aren't of birthdays or toys, but of dirt beneath my fingernails, the creak of rusted tools, and the scent of the earth after a hard rain. I was raised on a tiny, crumbling farm in a forgotten corner of the country, where survival was a daily negotiation with nature and fate. My father, Samuel Gray, was a farmer to his last breath, tough, proud, and honest. My mother, June, was the gentlest soul I've ever known. Together, they built a life with bare hands and blistered palms. But it wasn't enough. The economy crushed small farmers like ants under a boot. We couldn't compete with corporate agriculture. One season, a hailstorm destroyed our crops. Another year, a drought made the soil crack like broken pottery. I was only 10 when the bank came knocking. I still remember my father's trembling hands as he signed the foreclosure papers. He didn't cry, not even when we lost the house. But I heard him sob that night when he thought no one was listening. When my parents died in a car crash 3 years later, I didn't cry either. Not because I wasn't shattered, but because I didn't have the luxury. I had 2 younger siblings to feed. We were split by the system, me to a labor program for teenage boys, my sister to a foster home, my brother. I never found out where he went. That night, in a windowless dormitory with 40 other forgotten boys, I made a silent vow. I would change my fate. I didn't know how or when, but I refused to let the story end with tragedy. If the world wouldn't hand me a future, I'd carve one out myself. At 16, I was working 12-hour shifts on construction sites, then cleaning restrooms at a gas station through the night. I slept maybe 4 hours a day on a cot in a storage closet and spent every spare second devouring books. Business, psychology, marketing, anything I could find at the public library. I didn't have a mentor. I had a fire inside me that wouldn't go out. At 17, I bought a used laptop for $40 with cracked keys and a broken screen, and used it to design flyers for local plumbers and electricians. One client turned into 5. I learned quickly, if you solve problems, people pay attention. I used the cash to buy bulk wood scraps, built shelves in my friend's garage, and sold them online. The margins were low, but the lessons were rich. But life wasn't done testing me. A childhood friend, Liam, who had helped me sell those shelves, emptied our PayPal account one night and vanished. Every cent we had earned gone. I was crushed, not by the money, but by the betrayal. I stared at that empty balance and asked myself, is this where I quit? Instead, I took a breath, then another. Then I got up, grabbed my hammer, and started again. The world could take everything from me, but not my will. That was mine. At 18, I took a risk and moved to the city. I rented a 200-square-foot studio in a broken-down building where the water ran brown and the radiator hissed like a snake. I started working as a janitor at a co-working space. But I didn't mind, because every evening, while cleaning up after tech startups and freelancers, I listened. I studied how they talked, how they pitched ideas, how they solved problems. I'd take mental notes, then go home and research what I'd overheard. That's when I discovered app development. I had 0 coding experience. I didn't even own a smartphone. But I learned the basics from free tutorials, staying up until sunrise. I built a prototype for a scheduling app aimed at construction teams, something I knew firsthand could help. I emailed 100 companies. 98 ignored me. 1 replied. That one was enough. That small construction firm tried the app and loved it. Their endorsement gave me credibility. Within a year, I had 6 clients and a growing reputation. I reinvested every cent. No parties, no vacations, just relentless building. I finally had enough to bring my sister to live with me. She was 17, working at a diner, scared and silent from years in foster care. I gave her a room, a warm bed, and told her we'd never be apart again. I never stopped thinking about my brother. The app grew. By year 3, I'd hired a small team and expanded into logistics, helping contractors track materials and labor costs. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Investors started calling. I turned down the first 3. I didn't want their money if it meant giving up my vision. But when I found a partner who respected the mission, we struck a deal. Suddenly I had offices, employees, real clients. But I also had pressure. Meetings at 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. lawsuits over patent claims. Media criticism. Tech blogs calling us just another scheduling app. They didn't see the heart behind it. The years of pain, sweat, sacrifice. But I did. I saw it in every line of code, in every user review from a contractor who got to spend more time with his family. I saw it in my sister's smile when she started college, paid in full. One night, while reviewing our quarterly numbers, I sat back and realized something. We'd crossed $10 million in annual revenue. I should have celebrated, but all I could think about was my brother. Where was he? Did he know I was looking? That I never stopped? That's when I bought the mansion. Not out of vanity, but because I needed space. For my sister. For the family I dreamed of having. For a future where the past didn't haunt me. It was a sprawling estate, glass walls, a garden that bloomed year-round, a view of the skyline that made every sunset feel like poetry. But what made it special was the idea that people could walk in and feel safe, especially children. I adopted 2 twin boys from a local shelter, Riley and Theo, abandoned by their parents, just like I had been. I saw myself in their eyes. Fear, hunger, hope. I swore I'd give them the life I never had. But I needed help. Raising children while running a business is like juggling knives blindfolded. I needed someone trustworthy, not a professional nanny in a suit, but someone real, someone grounded, someone who would teach my kids about life, not just math and manners. That's when I met him, Jacob Turner, a humble farmer from a nearby town, recently retired after losing his land to corporate expansion. He wasn't looking for a job. He'd come to the city to visit his nephew, but fate brought him to my doorstep. He'd fixed a flat tire for my driver outside a grocery store. The driver had invited him in for a thank you meal. I saw the way Jacob looked at my kids, not with pity, but with warmth. The kind of warmth that can't be faked. We talked for hours. About crops, storms, life, loss. He reminded me of my father, stern but kind, weathered but wise. I offered him a position on the spot. Not as a gardener, not as a butler, but as a caretaker for my home, my children, my peace. He hesitated, said he didn't know the city way. I told him I wasn't hiring someone for polish. I was hiring someone for heart. He accepted. And that's when everything began to change. Not just for my children, not just for Jacob, but for me. Because sometimes the most profound transformations come not from fortune or fame, but from the quiet influence of someone who's walked through storms, carrying nothing but dignity. The day Jacob moved into the guest quarters of my mansion, the entire atmosphere shifted. Not with grandeur or disruption, but with stillness. A kind of presence that wrapped around the house like a warm quilt. My sons, Riley and Theo, instantly took to him. I watched them that first evening, perched on the patio as Jacob showed them how to tie a proper knot using nothing but garden twine. They sat, eyes wide, hands clumsy, but he never lost patience. He didn't speak much, he didn't have to. His actions told stories. He woke before dawn, brewed tea from scratch, and prepared breakfast with the gentleness of someone who understood that feeding others wasn't just about food. It was about presence, care, consistency. One morning, I found him mending a torn curtain, not with fancy fabric, but with a hand stitch that reminded me of my mother's. "No need to replace what can be repaired," he said, without looking up. That line stuck with me. In a world obsessed with upgrades and replacements, Jacob believed in restoration. At first, my staff didn't know what to make of him. He didn't demand. He didn't delegate. He simply did. I watched as my overworked chef, Sophia, tried to insist Jacob stay out of the kitchen. But the next morning, she asked for his cornbread recipe. 2 weeks later, she was leaving ingredients on the counter, just in case he felt like cooking. He worked the garden, tended to the boys, fixed squeaky doors, polished the stone floors with oil and cloth instead of machinery. He was never idle, yet never rushed. And slowly, he became the soul of my house. But it wasn't just the mansion he began to mend. It was me. I didn't realize how fractured I'd become. Running a billion-dollar company comes with a cost, not just long hours, but emotional erosion. You begin to wear masks. You stop laughing just to laugh. Your smile becomes rehearsed for boardrooms and cameras. The world applauds your success, but no one asks if you're happy. Jacob did. One evening, we sat on the back porch, watching the boys chase fireflies with empty mason jars. The sky was painted with fading gold and soft lavender. Jacob turned to me and asked, "You sleep well at night?" I chuckled. "Not really. Too many thoughts." He nodded. "Maybe you're confusing noise for thinking." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Thoughts that keep you up. They're usually questions you already know the answer to. You're just too afraid to accept it." That line hit harder than I expected. I hadn't told anyone, but for months I'd been feeling a growing emptiness. Despite my financial success, my empire, and my children, I felt hollow, disconnected, like I was building higher towers, but forgetting the foundation. I asked him how he stayed so grounded. He looked at the soil beneath his feet and said, "When your hands touch the earth every day, it's hard to float too high. The world pulls you back to what matters." From that day forward, I started joining him in the garden. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember what real things felt like. Digging, planting, harvesting, it reminded me of my roots. The sweat on my brow didn't feel like work. It felt like coming home. My sons bloomed under his care. They stopped asking for screens and started begging for stories. Every night, Jacob would tell them a new tale about old tractors, injured horses he'd nursed back to health, or the way his late wife used to bake bread by singing to the dough. That's when I learned he had lost his wife to cancer 10 years earlier. He didn't speak of it with sorrow, but with reverence. "She was my sunrise," he said once, while helping Theo build a toy sailboat. Never missed a morning without lighting up my day. It was then I realized why Jacob was so special. He wasn't just surviving. He was carrying the weight of love that never died. And in doing so, he made everyone around him feel lighter. One afternoon, I brought him into a board meeting. Not because he knew business, but because I wanted my executive team to witness wisdom that couldn't be learned from spreadsheets. We were discussing a failing product line. My CFO insisted we cut it, recoup losses, move on. Jacob, sitting quietly in the back, raised a hand. Everyone paused. He asked, "Have you spoken to the people buying it?" A silence followed. He leaned forward. "Sometimes, numbers look bad because you're measuring the wrong thing. Talk to your customers before you walk away. Ask them why they bought it. Maybe the problem isn't the product. Maybe it's how you're presenting it." It was a humbling moment. We followed his advice. Turned out, our marketing missed the emotional value the product held for a specific demographic. A rebrand and refocus later, sales rebounded. After the meeting, my COO pulled me aside and asked, "Where did you find this guy?" I smiled. "I didn't. He found me." Over time, Jacob became more than a caretaker. He became a compass. When my board fought over expansion strategies, I'd take the proposals to Jacob. He'd scan them silently, then say something simple like, "Feels like too much, too fast." Or, "Might be worth planting the seed now, even if the soil's not ready." It sounds odd, but his farming metaphors were often more accurate than any analyst forecast. My mansion stopped being a cold monument to wealth. It became a sanctuary of life. Music in the halls, bread baking in the kitchen, laughter over dinner, morning sunrises with coffee and early lessons in the backyard. The boys learned not just how to calculate and code, but how to care, how to listen, how to live. Then one evening, as we sat beneath the stars, Jacob told me a story I'll never forget. "I once had a neighbor," he began, "Old Man Carter. Never left his property, never spoke to anyone. We thought he was strange. Turns out, he'd spent 50 years planting trees on his land, fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes. Never sold a thing. When he passed, we found a note that said, 'I planted these for people I'll never meet. Let them eat well.'" He looked at me. "You've built a business. That's good. But don't forget to plant trees you'll never see." That's legacy. That night, I lay in bed thinking about his words. I'd measure my success by earnings, reach, and accolades. But legacy, that was something different. Something deeper. After Jacob's passing, a stillness swept through my home. Not the uncomfortable silence of absence, but a sacred hush, like the air itself was holding its breath in respect. I thought I had prepared myself for this moment. I knew Jacob's health had slowly been fading. He was never one to complain, but I noticed how he paused more often when climbing stairs, or how his hands trembled slightly as he watered the plants. But even in death, Jacob didn't leave with a whisper. He left with echoes. And I was about to hear every one of them. The letter he'd written to me wasn't the only one. Over the following week, envelopes began arriving from the oddest places, sealed notes delivered by people Jacob had quietly impacted during his time here. The grocer who said Jacob helped him pay his late mother's funeral costs in secret. The retired schoolteacher who revealed Jacob used to deliver homegrown vegetables to her doorstep every Sunday morning. A teenager from the mentorship program who shared how Jacob sat with him for 5 hours the night he planned to give up. He had lived simply but loved profoundly. I stood at his gravesite behind the mansion, his final request, and felt an overwhelming sense of duty. Not just to honor him, but to continue what he started. Because Jacob hadn't just planted vegetables and herbs in my garden, he'd planted something inside me. That weekend, I gathered my sons and told them the truth. We're not just going to be rich. We're going to be useful. Their eyes widened. Theo asked, "What do you mean?" I smiled. It means we build things that help people, not just things that make money. That was the birth of the Jacob Initiative. It began with a small idea, converting a wing of our mansion into a living mentorship home. Young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds could live, learn, and grow there for a year. They'd be taught entrepreneurship, trade skills, emotional intelligence, and just like Jacob showed me, how to slow down and see life. We hired former teachers, psychologists, gardeners, and mentors. We didn't use flashy marketing. We didn't need to. The story of Jacob spoke louder than any slogan. Word spread. Donors appeared. Volunteers signed up. Lives started changing. And somewhere in the process, so did mine. For the first time in years, I began stepping away from my company's daily operations. I realized I had built an empire, yes, but what mattered more now was what I was passing on. My billions weren't my legacy. Jacob was. I began inviting CEOs, investors, politicians, anyone I had influence with, to visit the garden Jacob had built. Not the one filled with crops and flowers, though that too was still tended lovingly, but the one now filled with people. Youth who had never known a warm meal suddenly growing herbs with their own hands. Girls who once feared their voices were learning public speaking beneath oak trees. Boys once written off as troublemakers now mentoring others. One particular evening, I hosted a private dinner for a few high-profile investors. Among them was Anthony Calder, a stern real estate magnate who hadn't cracked a smile in the 20 years I'd known him. After dessert, I took them on a walk through the garden. We passed a young woman teaching kids how to compost. "That's Lonnie," I explained. "She used to be homeless. 3 months here, and she's building her own sustainable living company." Calder nodded, but said nothing. A little further, a boy named Malik waved at me. "Mr. James, look, the tomato plants are finally sprouting." I turned to the group. Malik's father was incarcerated. His mom worked 3 jobs. He never had a backyard. Now, he wants to be an agricultural engineer. Calder looked at me and asked, "Why are you doing all this?" I paused. Then I said quietly, "Because a man who had nothing gave me everything." He said nothing more. 2 weeks later, Calder wired in a $2 million donation and wrote in the memo, "For Jacob's tomatoes." Not long after, my own sons came to me with an idea. "Dad," Riley said one night, "what if we build a school? Not like the ones we've seen, but something new, something Jacob would be proud of." Theo jumped in. "We could teach kids how to grow food, fix things, build character. We could call it the Carter School, like that guy Jacob told us about who planted all those trees." My throat tightened. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I nodded. And just like that, a school was born. We didn't just fund it. We designed it from scratch, with Jacob's values in every brick. There were no grades in the first year, just growth journals. No detention, just reset walks through the garden. Every student had to mentor someone younger. Every teacher had to learn something new from their students each month. It wasn't a school. It was a revolution in education. And it started right in my backyard. The Carter School opened with 30 students. By year 2, it had a waiting list of 3,000. Journalists came. Documentaries followed. But we never sought publicity. Our only aim was simple. Plant humans. Water them. Let them grow. And while the world looked in and admired, I looked back often. Back to that first day I saw Jacob in worn boots and a weathered hat. Back to the letter he left. Back to the lessons he never lectured, only lived. One day, while clearing out a shed Jacob used to store tools, I found a dusty leather notebook. Inside were scribbled thoughts, quotes, ideas, reflections. On one page, he wrote, "Most people wait for life to reward them. I say, reward life with the best version of yourself every day. Give it away. Love without return. Be kind even when it's inconvenient. Grow something, even if no one sees it." Another page had this: "A mansion isn't a home until laughter echoes through its halls and dirt from little shoes covers the floor." I sat there, cross-legged on the floor, and wept. Because Jacob didn't just help me become a better father or a better leader. He helped me become a better human. And in a world starved for meaning, he had handed me a seed that would feed generations. 3 years after Jacob passed, we held the first annual Jacob Legacy Harvest Festival. Over 2,000 people gathered in the fields surrounding the mansion. There were games, food from local farms, music, and testimonials. But the most powerful moment came from a boy named Eli. He stood on stage, holding a photograph of Jacob in one hand and his acceptance letter to a university in the other. "I met Jacob when I thought the world had forgotten me," he said. "He didn't just show me how to dig a hole or plant a seed. He showed me how to believe again. I want to be like him. Not famous. Not rich. Just real." The entire crowd stood in silence. Then applause erupted. And as I looked up at the stars that night, the same stars Jacob used to watch in silence, I felt him with us. In the soil, in the stories, in the hope. It's been nearly a decade since Jacob passed, and not a day goes by that I don't hear his voice, not audibly, but in the small decisions, the still moments, the questions I ask myself before speaking or acting. Would Jacob be proud of this? I used to measure success by numbers, profits, rankings, market share. Now, I measure it by stories, faces, tears, laughter. Moments that never make the headlines but ripple through human hearts like quiet revolutions. And that's what this final part of the journey is about. Not the fortune I accumulated, but the wealth I finally understood. It was a chilly morning when I got a call from Theo. He was now in his early 20s, running operations at the Carter School and deeply involved in the mentoring programs Jacob had unknowingly inspired. "Dad," he said, "I think I've found the land." "What land?" I asked, half smiling. "The next expansion. A 200-acre farm just outside the city. Old barn, abandoned house, needs work, but the soil is rich. I think it's time we built Jacob's farm for real." That name hit me like a warm gust of air in the dead of winter. I drove out there the next morning, and as I stood on that wild, untamed land, I could already see it. Children digging with tiny shovels, volunteers teaching classes under the sun, greenhouses humming with life, and a place where people from every walk of life could come together and heal. Not just a farm, a sanctuary. So we bought it. Not with venture capital, not with government grants, with donations from the thousands of lives Jacob had touched. Single mothers who had found safe housing through our initiatives. Former prisoners, now working as program coordinators. Teenagers who'd been on the verge of dropping out but went on to start small businesses. They all chipped in. Some gave $5. Others gave $500. One woman sent 27 cents taped to a card that read, "I never met Jacob, but I met someone he mentored." That changed my life. That's when I realized the true wealth of a man isn't in how many zeros trail his name, but in how many hearts carry his legacy. Construction began in spring. We didn't hire the biggest contractors. We brought in the community. We let the youth design the layout. We let artists paint murals. We let elders guide the garden structure using traditions passed down generations. By the time the grand opening rolled around, Jacob's farm didn't look like a project. It looked like home. But something unexpected happened that day. An older man approached me quietly during the celebration, dressed in a modest brown jacket and holding a letter. "Are you James Cole?" he asked, his voice slightly hoarse. "I am," I replied, curious. He handed me the envelope. "I'm Samuel. Jacob was my brother." My breath caught in my throat. "He never mentioned you." "He wouldn't have," he smiled faintly. "We had a falling out years ago. Over something petty. I wanted to find him, to reconcile, but I waited too long. I didn't even know he'd passed until recently. But then I found this." He opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of the very first photograph I had taken with Jacob. Us standing by the greenhouse, both in muddy boots, both grinning. On the back, in Jacob's handwriting, were the words, "Tell my brother I forgave him the day he left." I never needed an apology, just hoped he'd plant again one day. Samuel's eyes filled. So did mine. I hugged him like a brother. And in that moment, I realized something deep. Forgiveness is the final act of wealth. It doesn't come from abundance of resources, but abundance of humility. In the months that followed, Samuel stayed. He began teaching woodworking to the children, crafting benches, tables, even carved signs bearing Jacob's quotes. He was quiet like his brother, but when he spoke, every child listened. And slowly, he healed just like the land around him. Meanwhile, my sons had begun to grow into men not defined by my name, but by their own choices. Riley had taken the initiative to partner with tech firms and create a free online portal for our mentoring curriculum, Seeds of Change, they called it. It reached classrooms in 5 countries within the first year. Theo worked with city officials to convert unused land into community gardens, each staffed by program graduates and open to local residents. One of those gardens is now named the Sanctuary. That was Theo's way of honoring Jacob. As for me, I began stepping into quieter roles. Not retiring, just redirecting. I spoke less at business conferences and more at juvenile centers. I donated anonymously to causes Jacob once casually mentioned over morning tea. I found joy in simplicity, in purpose. One evening, as I walked through Jacob's original garden behind the mansion, now blooming more than ever, I saw a little girl kneeling by the soil. "Whatcha planting?" I asked. She looked up, eyes wide with innocence and hope. "A dream," she whispered. I knelt beside her, curious. "A dream?" She nodded, patting the dirt gently. "Miss Lonnie said if we plant something with love and take care of it, it can become anything. I want mine to grow into a house for my mommy and me." Tears welled in my eyes. She had no idea that the soil beneath her hands was once broken ground, saved by the very hands of a man who had nothing, but gave everything. Years passed. The mansion transformed into a full-time campus for Jacob's Way Foundation. The school expanded to 3 cities. The farm became self-sustainable, feeding hundreds. And one winter evening, I stood before an audience of over 10,000 live, online, and in person, delivering a keynote at the first ever Legacy Beyond Wealth Global Summit. And I began not with my story, but his. "I was once a billionaire who didn't know how to live," I said. "Then I met a man with nothing but a shovel, a heartbeat, and a heart full of gold." I spoke of Jacob, his humility, his wisdom, his refusal to be rushed, his belief that children are not burdens but gardens. At the end, I said, "Don't chase money, chase meaning. Don't try to go viral, try to go vital to someone's life. Find your Jacob, or better yet, be someone's Jacob." The room stood in applause. But it wasn't for me. It was for him. On what would have been Jacob's 80th birthday, We buried a small time capsule beneath the tree he once planted when he first arrived. Inside were letters from people around the world whose lives he changed. One boy from Brazil wrote, "I've never been to your farm, but your story planted hope in my mother's heart, and she planted it in mine." A woman from India said, "I started a community garden for widows. We named it after a man we never met, Jacob." A war veteran wrote, "When I came home, broken and lost, your foundation saved me. One of your mentors taught me how to breathe again." Even in death, Jacob was still alive. Today I walk slowly, not because of age, but because I've learned the value of every step. My mansion is louder than ever, with the sound of life, learning, healing. The floors are no longer pristine. They're messy, imperfect, alive, just the way Jacob would have liked it. And as I sit on the porch each evening, holding a warm cup of tea, I often look out across the acres he once tended, now home to thousands of transformed lives. I smile, because this isn't just the story of a billionaire who hired a farmer. It's the story of how that farmer saved a billionaire's soul. And that, my friends, is the harvest of a life well lived.